Well, it's good to be together to study the Word of God. We are working our way through the book of Romans. Paul, in the first chapter, the first verse, introduces himself. Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus. And what a tremendous way to be able to introduce yourself to a group of people. He will go on in verse 8 and thank them because their faith as believers is becoming known around the world. And I think that should be, maybe in some ways, a goal for churches, that our faith, our belief, our trust in the Lord is such that we take on big things, as the Bible would describe it, more than we could ask or imagine, that allows the power and the authority of God to be demonstrated in this world. But that's what the Roman church was known for, and what a tremendous thing to be known for. But Paul's going to begin to address some issues, if you will. And there's a dominant one. It's about the idea of how salvation works, if you will. And so he's going to begin to address that in verse 18. He says, the wrath of God is being revealed against all godlessness and wickedness. And if we appreciate that the idea there's a day coming when you are going to stand before God and you are going to have to answer for all of our godless deeds and our wickedness, how are we going to be able to address that? And that's a lot of what Paul addresses in the letter, and we have been looking at that. A while back, my wife Kim got a letter about serving jury duty. And she wasn't very excited about it. I was kind of surprised by that. I kind of anticipated that she's like, yeah, this is kind of a neat opportunity, your civic duty. Again, it's a little time away from work and some of those things. But again, she just wasn't all that excited about it. But in the idea of like a court setting, it's kind of one of those things that you can use in these first couple of chapters to appreciate what Paul is doing. If you will, there's a person on trial. And, are they guilty or are they not? And you can appreciate both sides are making their case. They're going to stand before the wrath of God. They're going to be before the judge. And he's going to rule fairly, impartially, but completely righteous and completely just. And that's part of the argument that Paul makes in these early chapters. That is who God is, and that is how he is going to judge. But how are you going to be ready for that? And part of the case that is made, if you will, it's kind of the defense side of it. We're going to be a good people. We're nice. We would give you the shirt off our back. We would do anything for anybody. We're good. Paul goes on and he talks about, they're law abiding. They're followers of the Ten Commandments. Well, how well do you do at keeping the Ten Commandments? And sometimes they want to stone people. If you're without sin, you cast the first stone. And we find out we're not great at that. Jesus will talk to him about, you do these things for the Lord when it's convenient, but when it's inconvenient, you find excuses through that. And Jesus is like, do both, not just one or the other. And time again, you just see that though these people throw themselves out there as, we're perfect at keeping the law, nobody is perfect at keeping the law. I'm a Jew. There's just this laundry list of things that they say, because I'm circumcision, because of this, I am ready to stand before the Lord and I will be righteously judged. And Paul's argument is, none of those things are going to work. It doesn't matter whether you are Jew or you are Gentile. And so, if you will, both sides have been making their case. And in chapter 3, toward the end of that, if you will, I want to treat it as the closing argument, if you will. And so Paul steps up and he's going to make his concluding remarks why, if you are trusting in being good, if you're trusting in circumcision, if you're trusting in the law, if you're trusting in any of these earthly things, none of them are going to equip you, prepare you, or make you ready for standing before this holy and righteous judge. Paul says in verse 9 of chapter 3, what shall we conclude then, if you will? It sounds like those concluding remarks, doesn't it? But that's what Paul wants to do. There's all of this evidence that has been presented. But what are we going to do with it all? He says, do we have any advantage? Is all of these things that they are throwing out there that are preparing them, that are preparing us to meet the Lord, are they to our advantage? And his response to that is, not at all. Paul asks the question and then he answers it. For we have already made the charge that Jew or Gentile alike are all under the power of sin. So this idea of being good, of trying to perfectly keep the law, of some outward thing like circumcision, on and the list goes, none of these things are going to prepare us or to make us right before the Lord. And so Paul goes on, as it is written. And now Paul is going to go through, if you will, a whole series of bullet points. And they're just Bible verses that are selected from all over, basically the Old Testament, that he is going to use to illustrate that they are really not ready to stand before this holy and righteous God. Paul says in verse 10, there is no one who is righteous, not even one. Now, it's not to say that people do not do good things. We do good things. We know people who do good things. Sometimes people are kind when you're surprised how kind they were in the way that we were treated. People forgive one another. People are very generous to one another on occasion. People do a lot of good things. But all that being said, that's really not the criteria, and that's what Paul's pointing out. Nobody is righteous. Nobody is perfect. Nobody does the right thing every time. There are occasions when we should have been generous, but we weren't. We should have held our tongue, but we didn't. And all those things just become this accumulative, if you will, account why we are not fit to stand before a holy and righteous God. There is no one, he says in verse 11, who understands. There is no one who seeks God. And a lot of that, like the Bible would teach us, that so many times when it comes to making decisions, we find ourselves wanting to rely on human wisdom and understanding versus trusting in the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26 says, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. There are so many times when we listen to, and it happens a lot. You know, you'll be a debate. You know, there's the atheist side, and then there's the Christian side, and they go back and forth in one another, and then they discuss like who won the debate. You know, and if you will, one side is trusting human wisdom, and the other side, in theory, is trusting the wisdom of the Lord. And yet we try to argue about who is prevailing in this. And you see it all the time on college campuses. If you want to look it up on the internet, you can watch, thousands, millions of little video clips of these arguments and debates that go back and forth. And ultimately what is happening is there's human wisdom arguing with the wisdom of God. And what happens a lot for a people is they're just like, I am going to side with human wisdom. I know what God says, but I'm going to trust myself. And that's nothing new, but there will come a day when we are going to stand before God, and all of a sudden, as intellectually sound and reasonable as all of our arguments have seemed, when we stand before God, we are going to find that they just simply fall apart. And so Paul says there's a lot of people out there who simply rely or trust in human wisdom, but there will come a day when it will fail. Verse 12 says, all have turned away, and they have together become worthless. There is no one who is good, not even one. It is the idea that these behaviors and these acts, they're not accidental. They are intentional. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, verse 6, it says, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us have turned to their own way. This is something that is just happening. We know God, we know his wisdom, or we can look at creation and we can understand that this was not something that just happened, but it came about by design. We can look at all this, if you will. God is not hiding in what he made. He is making himself known. But people simply choose to reject it, to go their own direction. In the original language, the idea is worthless. It's unprofitable. It has become useless. We appreciate that when we go back to those times, they didn't have refrigeration like we have it. And so some of the picture that Paul is using here is the idea of milk that has gone sour. And it is now no longer any good. Maybe more for us. Maybe you're one who you like to have some milk around, but you don't really drink it a lot. And so on occasion you find yourself just having to throw it out. Well, okay, so you don't really know. You get your cereal out, you put your sugar on it, you grab the milk. Yeah, it's a few days past date, but okay. And you pour it out, and all of a sudden, instead of that beautiful flow of milk, it comes out in chunks. And you're like, oh, that's it. Now I've ruined the whole thing. And that's exactly Paul's point. We trust in this human wisdom and knowledge and understanding only to arrive at this conclusion that the whole thing is sour and it's completely wasted because we have chosen to trust in our own wisdom. Now, Paul's going to change, if you will, his argument or tactic just a little bit, and begins like a series of verses. Like the throat is like an open grave. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. It's just this idea that they follow their own path, they follow their own directions, and then their words, though they can sound reasonable, they make these arguments or whatever. But Paul's contention is what they don't understand is they are just foul. In the book of John, chapter 11, verse 39, like in that chapter is kind of recorded us the death of Lazarus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, right? And Lazarus is sick. Word goes to Jesus, you need to come. Jesus doesn't. Lazarus dies. He's been buried now, and Jesus shows up. Mary and Martha both have very similar discussions with him. If you had only been here, he would have lived. And Jesus like, let's just go to the tomb. And there Jesus asked for the stone to be rolled away. And it says, by this time, don't roll away. By this time, there is a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. That picture, if you will, that's what Paul is using as he's talking about these people who trust in him. When they talk, as eloquent as their words may sound, as polished as it may appear, it's just, all it is a foul odor. Because, again, they're going to stand before this holy and righteous God. And as reasonable as their arguments seem to them, as polished as they are, he says, when they stand before God, it's not going to hold up. It's not going to work. It will be exposed for what it is, just this horrible stench that all it did was led them astray and led other people astray. And it's a difficult thing, if you will, for a lot of people to appreciate, but that's the argument that Paul is making. It says their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their way. The way of peace they do not know. Again, Paul just couples some verses together, but he's looking to make a very similar point. These people, as they go about their life, they are not looking out for the best interest of other people. It's merely about themselves. And the Ten Commandments help us to appreciate that argument as well. The Ten Commandments are like a series of thou shalt not, right? And it's easy to look at those as it's about like my behavior and my conduct. And it is. It's about, not stealing. It's about not lying. It's about not committing adultery. It is about how I behave. It is about how I conduct myself. But it's more than that. It's about the way I am treating other people. Notice what he says. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Are they hurting somebody else? Yes, they are. Ruin and misery mark their way. Why? Because they are hurting other people. Their way of peace, they do not know. All the turmoil that just simply left in their way. It happens over and over again where people simply look out for themselves and with no regard for what is happening to somebody else. To try to illustrate it, if you will, in a positive way. In the Old Testament, there's the story of Joseph, sold into slavery, goes down, he's in Potiphar's home. It's not very long that Potiphar's wife recognizes he is a handsome, well-built young man. And she begins daily, to throw herself at him. And his argument back to her is, I can't do this to God, and I can't do it to Potiphar. So what Joseph basically is saying is probably a part of him is like, sure, what young guy wouldn't love to be with a woman? But I'm not going to do that because it's not just me. There are other people who are going to be hurt. And so I wouldn't do that. Well, that mentality, that concept is just foreign to these people. But if you will, all of this just condemns them. It condemns us over and over again. You only look out for yourself. You don't care about other people. And when you stand before a holy God, all of this is simply going to be laid bare. It says in verse 18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. Oh, we fear things or are respectful of certain things. Most of us, I think we can relate to this. You're zipping down the road, maybe running a little late, and so you're trying to make good time. You're speeding. But if you would see a police officer, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to adjust my speed, and I look back and I hope that I don't see his lights come on and come out behind me. And we adjust our life and our behavior when we feel like if you're doing something and all of a sudden the house door opens and you're like, ooh, shouldn't be doing this. And so you immediately adjust your behavior. You're doing something at work and all of a sudden you hear the boss's voice. You push the little key that makes your screen go black or whatever it is because you're doing something you know what to do. And you alter your behavior in all kinds of ways because you want to give the appearance that you're something. And yet Paul's argument is there is no fear before the eyes of God. Okay, in all of those scenarios, if a policeman wasn't watching, if your spouse wasn't watching, if your boss wasn't watching, whoever wasn't watching, somebody is watching. And Paul's argument is God is. And though God sees all of this, you'll alter your behavior for a policeman or your wife or your husband or your boss, but you have no regard for God watching you. You don't alter your behavior in any way. No respect for him. And then all of a sudden, somehow you're going to stand before a holy, righteous God on the day of wrath and make some argument about. And so Paul is making, if you will, a pretty strong case, isn't he? About how we want to prepare ourselves to be ready for the Lord. Verse 19. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth will be silenced. Paul knows that somebody else is going to get up and make a counter argument about how they're ready for the wrath of God, the law, all that kind of stuff. And he says, when you think about it, it's going to silence everybody. In fact, the other side, you don't even need to get up and talk. There's going to be no point. The whole world will be held accountable to God. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by works of the law. None of their arguments are going to hold up. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. And if you will, I think that's a lot of what Paul has been driving at this whole time. He desperately wants these readers, I think he desperately wants us, to have a consciousness about our sin. To be aware of the real condition that we are in when we consider that one day we will stand before a holy and righteous God. Now, it's easy to look at this, I think, and feel like Paul is just trying to demoralize this person. You need to understand who you are, and you do. You need to understand who you are. I kind of want to argue, I don't think that's exactly Paul's point. I've had the privilege of coaching, for a number of years. And one of the things that I like to do as a coach is use video to let the kids see themselves doing things. Because I think it's I'm kind of a visual learner, and so I guess I assume like other people are like me, and so, but sometimes they're like, "You're doing this." "Oh no, I'm not, coach." And so I show them a video. I'm like, "Yes, you are. you are doing this." Sunday in the sermon at church, I'm going to use a video clip of the Michigan-Purdue basketball game. And there's a young player on there, and I want to show the clip. And some of the things that he does playing defense are great. Like his guy is going to come up and set a pick, and it looks like he's talking on the pick. That's good. When the ball carrier, or the guy handling the ball comes his way, he steps up and hedges and takes that away. That's great. Then there's some more movement. He kind of gets away from the action a little bit. A player goes in for a layup, and this young man, as the ball's going in, he just watches it happen. And then the guy that he should have blocked out gets that missed layup and dunks it. And what I'd want the players to appreciate is he got to where he was watching the game. He didn't keep playing, and he should have boxed his guy out and got that rebound, and then Purdue would have had a chance to be a little more competitive in that last little bit of the game. But I would want to show that to him, because he might think, "Oh, no, this is exactly what you should have done." Here's what I'm really trying to get at. As a coach, when you show that to a player, are you trying to demoralize that person? Okay, well, maybe some coaches are, but my contention is, I don't think 99% of the coaches who show their players the mistakes that they make are trying to demoralize them. They want them to understand what they're doing, so that oh, wow, I can learn from that. I can grow from that. I can do better. If you will, I think that's in part what Paul's trying to do here to these people in Rome. You need to see yourself for who you really are. And it's not meant to demoralize you. It is meant to bring you to a position of change. And so his argument is, if you are going to stand before God because you do everything right, let me show you the tape. You don't. Do you get some things right? Absolutely. But do you get it all right? Or are you perfect, holy, and righteous? No, you're not. And so, if none of that, if I'm not, then where do I turn? And for us, here's this beautiful thing. Next week is Easter Sunday. And Paul is going to, again, begin to introduce them to the reality that this is where our real hope lies. It is in Jesus Christ alone.